And they had elected, the citizens of that town had been smart enough and capable enough, and they had good, competent people step up and had run for office, and they'd elected a capable council who then was in charge of those EIC funds. And Kevin told me that they got the funds, they started spending those funds on their roads and their drainage and paying down their debt. And they were able to pay down their debt in their town, to improve their roads and drainage, and to decrease significantly their sales tax. I'm sorry, their ad valorem tax. And that impressed me, and I thought, and I asked him, I said, Kevin, would you be willing to come down and address our city council, talk to them about how you guys up there accomplished that, and maybe we could learn something from it? And he said he'd be more than happy to. And I think that's something that, you know, we really need to do here. I've recently learned that in New Braunfels, they faced a situation kind of like ours years ago, and that they've been busily addressing it. And I'd like to go and meet with and perhaps have some members of their community come and talk with us and talk about ways and things that they've done to address, you know, economic challenges. And I think it's high time that we did that here, and I think we need to get busy rapidly on doing that, instead of just saying, our current council has a tendency, I think, of saying, well, we've got X amount of taxes and you'll be lucky if they don't go up. And I just don't think that that's a progressive attitude in terms of thinking about your tax situation.
When you say economic challenges, I think there could be many things, whether it's the number of jobs available to residents, to the commercial tax base,
yes,
versus property. What do you see as economic challenges and practical things that as a council member you could do to improve the economic picture?
Yeah, absolutely. Very important question. I have to tell you about a little visit I had with a woman on the campaign trail. She lived near the Leslie Drive area behind Luby's. And she told me, she said, Mr. Keeble, you know, my husband and I saved for 16 years to buy our home. And we bought our home. We've been in it 2 years now, and we're wondering if we made the right decision. And when you hear things like that and people are legitimately concerned about that, you recognize very quickly that we do have issues, we do have concerns here we've got to address. I'll say this, Mr. Gross gave a radio interview recently where he was talking with Harley Blue, and Harley talked about the challenges that our middle class face here. And Mr. Gross made the comment, and Harley wrote about it in the paper, well, they'll just have to move away, is what Mr. Gross said about our younger people. I don't have that attitude. I don't think it's a caring attitude, and I don't know how anybody could spend much time visiting with our middle class here in Kerrville and have that attitude, to have people say to you, you know, I'm really struggling, I'm on a tight budget, and I don't know how I'm going to be able to afford to make my budget work, and to watch my appraisal values continue to rise and my taxes continue to rise. Many people here, you know, feel like they're just in a tight squeeze. And I think that some of the place 4 candidates mentioned the interest that they had in trying to promote clean industry here, in trying to help provide for jobs for people who are really struggling. I think it's important, and I'll say this kind of to reiterate the last point, I think it's important that we begin to talk with some other communities and find out how they've done things. How have they promoted industry? How have they really helped their labor force? We can't afford to keep losing our middle class here. It is of significant concern to me that so many, for example, of our police officers and firefighters have to live in another county, or are certainly not in Kerrville, because they can't afford the cost of living here, and they work here and they're employed here, but they can't afford to live here. And so I think from the terms of both affordable housing and jobs that pay well enough, those are significant issues. And I just think we need to start doing a lot better job of really looking at how we can attract those businesses. That's part of why I want to be a full-time member of the Kerrville City Council. I'm not talking, you know, about doing this job part-time. I'm talking about full-time. I've actually been meeting with people and talking about this issue full-time over the better part of the last year. And if I'm willing to do that on a campaign basis, I'm certainly willing to do it on a serving basis. And I think that there's a lot of room for somebody to really reach out to the business community and get busy with that. Don't just say, well, that's up to our city manager, that's up to our city staff. I think that's what our current council does. They say, that's city staff's job, that's city manager's job. It doesn't have to be only their job. We can have a council that's every bit as engaged in trying to help and recruit business for our area as are the staff and other members. And let's face it, I mean, if we're all dependent on the city staff and the city manager to recruit business for us, or KEDF for that manager, from that aspect, then we're failing miserably. They're not getting the job done. Let's face it, we're losing business. And that's what we've got to change, and that's what I want to be personally involved in. I've had some discussions recently with some different folks who are looking at the possibility of coming to Kerrville, and their biggest concern is, can I come to Kerrville? Can I find an appropriate labor force, and will I be supported by the local government? And frankly, the answers to those questions right now aren't what they need to be, and we have to change it here to make those answers positive instead of negative. And I think that's going to be key to our future economic success. We've got to start cooperating too. I think cooperation is a very important aspect of all this. Right now, we have challenges, I think, in cooperation, for example, between our city council and our county government. I know some of the county commissioners. I've gotten to know them over the last year, and I feel that those guys are people who can be worked with. I think that there are, certainly I think we can get our issue with the blended set of standards for the ETJ worked out. I think there are things that need to be accomplished now that are holding us back from economic development. And I think a better attitude between our council. There are ways that our council and our commissioners are working together well. For example, with the airport board, I think that those discussions have gone well and that they're moving forward in the right direction on that. And there are other areas, you know, we share a lot of joint interests. For example, the library and EMS and some different services that are provided. The city and the county share joint interests, and in some areas they're working effectively. But I think it can be much more effective than it currently is. And the relationship, I think, needs to be improved, especially on the ETJ issue. I'm particularly concerned about the certificate of convenience and necessity issue. You may have noticed that my wife and the council differed significantly at the last meeting, and the reason for that was because she wanted to allow the people in the county who wanted to opt out and requested it late to do so to be able to opt out. She was, in my opinion, correct in that assessment. We cannot continue to alienate county residents. Okay, we just can't do it. Our current council doesn't really care, it doesn't seem, about county residents because the residents aren't allowed to vote for them. But I want to tell you something. We've got a lot of members of county residents who work in this city, many of whom own businesses in our city, and they have a strong interest in what happens. We've got to change how they feel about Kerrville. If you go and you start talking to county residents, people who live in the extraterritorial jurisdiction, you know what you'll hear from them? You'll hear, I hope Kerrville doesn't annex me. I don't want to be part of that. I've heard it over and over from them. And that's an attitude that has been inculcated over years of I think, mistreatment. And I think that's something we've got to change. And the CCN's a perfect example. I don't believe we should have even done the CCN. I think it was a bad idea. I believe it was a water grab. Rick Johns came and spoke to the council the other night about it, and he said, I want to be captain of my own ship. And I think he put down the argument for it. You go talk to the folks with UGRA like I have, and you'll find out pretty quickly that they don't think it was a good idea. And look at it this way. I went to a UGRA meeting recently, and Gene Smith, our former mayor, asked this question. He said, Ray Buck was leading the presentation from UGRA, and Gene said, Ray, let me ask you this. He said, why are we trying to enlarge our water jurisdiction here around Kerrville when we've just been in a drought and we were barely able to supply water for people we had? We were actually, in stage 3 water restrictions.